Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Fallen Man by Treadgold. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, priest. No, that wasn't right. No priest in that nursery rhyme. Who will I marry? The girls asked themselves. Priest wasn't an option, though thief was. Go figure. Edward was officially still a priest. The church held you in its talons with the strength and tenacity of a harpy eagle. The wheels of laicization turned ever so slowly. Only the Pope himself could release you from the vow of celibacy. Someday, Edward would be free, but he would never marry. He was still a rich man. Who to thank now? Not God. A poem came to mind. A book of verses beneath the bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou. The Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam. All the rage in Edward's day. His youth, that is. Every dog has its day. Day is done, gone the sun. He looked down at his book. Not a book of verses, but his brother's thriller, Kapow, the series opener. Good stuff. Hardly poetry. A gripping thriller in a cozy cafe, a stein of Guinness, a bowl of gumbo, and what rhymed with cafe? He had no thou. A roll in the hay, or maybe a great lay? Hello? He looked up at the woman, feigning surprise, as if he hadn't been drooling over her for the last hour. She pranced around the cafe on her stacked sandals like a beautiful wild mare, her impossibly long, firm legs peeking through the slit in her pencil skirt. A long plait of shiny black hair hung halfway down her back. Her eyes were green. A deep, complex range of greens and golds, all the colors of the rainforest. Her complexion was creamy and sun-kissed. She had to be sick to death of oglers like him. Would you like anything else? She asked in her low, sultry voice. She pointed at his empty stein. The kitchen is closed until dinner, but I can bring you another beer? Guinness? How did she know? She hadn't taken his order. He looked at his watch. 2:30. I should clear out so you can prep for dinner, he said uncertainly. Nonsense. Hang on. She was back in a flash with a Guinness for him and a glass of water for herself. On the house. She slid into the chair across from him, crossing her long legs. You're turning into a regular. I know the gumbo is good, but you should give something else a try. The shrimp etouffee, for instance. Ah, she'd been watching him too. This was his third visit. Lisette Manegold. She extended her graceful hand with its manicured short red nails, then retracted the offer as if fearing he might not consider her a social equal. He'd been too slow to react. Folding his hands on the table, he said, Your cafe, then. Why Cajun? Are you French? Not that I know of. Mostly Polish on my dad's side, Irish on my mother's. I was born and raised in New Jersey, a tourist town. Cape May. You have a French mouth. She blushed, and he winced. The observation had been insanely personal. He was woefully out of practice in polite society. He'd meant that her lips were full, luscious, and drooped sensually at the corners, until she smiled, which she did now. If I'm not mistaken, you're an O'Connell brother, Edward? The priest? The word was loaded enough to flatten him. Oy, that sounded bad, she added quickly. Not a criticism like Father Ralph de Bricassard, handsome like him. She wiped her brow. Can't we start over? Never read it, Edward said, acknowledging the reference to the Thornbirds. It wasn't the first time he'd been compared to Father Ralph. Had the fictional priest ended up leaving the church for the sake of love? He thought not. Probably came to a bad end. Former priest, he clarified. I had a parish in Philadelphia, a hop, skip, and a jump away from Cape May. Ah, a more vehement shake of the head. I haven't been home since I graduated high school. My restaurant's first location was in Port Angeles. She sounded wistful. Probably should have stayed put. Why the move? Her smile didn't reach her eyes this time. The pause might mean she was inventing a lie. It seemed time for a change. I still own the building. Here I only rent. Port Townsend generally has a more sophisticated clientele. She grinned. Doesn't mean they don't enjoy karaoke. I limit that to one night a week. The silence lingered. My real name isn't Lisette, she confessed. It's Leslie. But I hate that name. I wasn't too fond of Leslie the woman either, that phase in my life, so now it's Lisette. Ah, interesting. Edward had a talent for eliciting confessions. Her blush told him she wished she could take it back. Most Leslies reinvented as Lisettes would feel the same. She stood and said in a more formal tone, If you'll excuse me, I have work to do before we open for dinner. Of course. Before she could anticipate him, he reached for her hand and felt a jolt of connection. Nothing more, he was relieved to note. That is, no messages from beyond. He did enjoy the feel of her slim, cool fingers. He gave the hand a little shake before releasing it. Seeing how the gesture unbalanced her, he regretted the impulse. Now he was just another handsy man wanting a piece of her. But that wasn't the vibe he got from her. Regaining her composure, she gave him a friendly nod before disappearing into the kitchen. If only he could invite her back to his hotel. He left a $20 bill on the table and headed out onto Water Street, festooned for Christmas with reams of colored lights like the Victorian town it was, eager to bank on the season. Lisette's hometown of Cape May was another Victorian seaside village, only with white sand beaches and water warm enough for swimming at least in the summer. Edward vastly preferred this version of Christmas. A fantastical season of goodwill and largest presided over by a jolly old elf, to the solemn celebration of Christ's birth chosen by the church to coincide with winter solstice. He no longer resented the church, just wanted nothing more to do with it. All of it. The baby Jesus, the suffering and bloody Christ on the cross, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Holy Trinity. He thought of the deacon who had tried to frame him and sought once again to banish the low-down skunk from his mind. If not for his special abilities, Edward would still be mired in that mess. Instead, he was free. Free to be you and me, someone had said. Marlowe Thomas? Snippets like that, a jumble of thoughts from his secular past, kept popping into his head. What did it mean to be free to him? To be him? Shouldn't it be he? Technically. The air was crisp, cool, and briny, and he pulled up the collar of his cashmere peacoat and adjusted his scarf, taking a moment to observe a freighter far out in the bay. The old children's song Barges came to mind. Barges, I would like to go with you. I would like to sail the ocean blue. Barges, is there treasure in your hold? Do you fight with pirates brave and bold? Nope. No more sailing off into adventure, not for him. He thought he understood why his restless family had resettled here, leaving the cruel world behind. They wanted and deserved an explanation for his self-imposed exile. All in good time. Unlike him, they were fundamentally nice people. He climbed the terrace steps, the long staircase that began at Holler Fountain, and was presided over by a lovely naked nymph. He could use a tumble with someone like that. He wondered if Lisette was dating anyone. She seemed interested. Or maybe being in the hospitality industry, she treated everyone like that. He'd gone a little wild since leaving the priesthood. It was a short leap from total celibacy back to sexual profligacy. Not much in between for a guy like him. You can't continue on the road to ruin in Port Townsend, he reminded himself. This town is too small. Perhaps that was why he'd chosen this destination after he debauched the sojourn in Paris. For some reason, he'd been drawn to the idea of a family Thanksgiving, and his mother had convinced him that his return to the fold would be celebrated with a fatted lamb. Or in this case, a not-so-fatted wild turkey. Or not that he'd been prodigal, he had been judgmental, but the reason wasn't simple. Lead us not into temptation, the Lord's Prayer said. Not keep us from sinning. Edward had toyed with the idea of visiting the O'Connell compound ever since he'd first began tracking his family's life events and scandals in the press, tabloid and otherwise. First, Joe's career as a country music idol had been stalled by vocal nodules, and he'd married a normal woman he'd rescued in the woods. As normal as a blazingly blue-eyed, golden-skinned goddess could be. A man would give up a lot for a woman like that. The requiem for Joe's career had been premature. Fickle as his vocal cords remained, he still pulled off the occasional tour. Their sister Teresa's run-in with some local thug had led to her marrying Liam, the twin brother of Allie, Joe's wife. Liam might be even more beautiful than his sister, despite the shrapnel scars. Those otherworldly blue eyes had been passed on to Jo and Allie's identical twin girls. David had returned from practicing medicine in Africa and was now a script doctor. His nubile actress wife had done exactly one movie where her bountiful charms were on full display, and it was unclear if she intended to keep her Screen Actors Guild membership current. Edward had seen that movie, titled Insanity, at the Rose Port Townsend's Historic Theater, now a movie house. David was a lucky man. Jake was checking up with a married woman in a rented Victorian B&B, having abandoned his position as CEO of the family business to write best-selling novels. In short, while Edward lost 10 years caught up in a series of, in retrospect, meaningless rituals, his siblings had been busy. They were all here now. He'd tried a little familial bonding on Thanksgiving, but his mother kept pulling him back to her side as if he were 6 years old and liable to wander off and be devoured by a cougar or a grizzly bear. Or was she afraid he'd leave her to the mercy of the savages? She'd been surprisingly upset when he'd chosen to stay behind while she and Rostand returned to Seattle, enough to rend her garments had they lived in biblical times, or maybe not. Her garments were far too expensive and well-tailored. Jake and Teresa had submitted to her formidable will for years. Had she believed that Edward would take their place? He was staying in a suite at the Bishop Hotel on Washington Street, even though Jo and Allie had offered one of their guest cabins. He'd go it alone for now. Baby steps. He didn't know the address, but had been told that Teresa's office was located on the edges of the business district on Lawrence Street. Ah, there it was, Victorians sorely in need of TLC. The sign read, Teresa O'Connell Ryan, Interior Design. Office hours 9 to 11 and 1 to 3, or by appointment. It was almost 3. Should Edward have made an appointment? He rang the doorbell. If no one answered, he'd call Teresa on her cell. The door was opened by a young woman. Cleopatra, he thought. Tilted eyes, a full red mouth, fine dusky skin, and a long aquiline nose. Average height, something like 5'5", voluptuous but slim. Wow. Young. Too young for you, old man. I'm Edward, she broke in. Can I call you Eddie? She grinned. Her voice was tart, acidic, but also teasing. To him, Eddie was a small whirlpool. No, he grew flustered. Ed? She tilted her head. Eddie sounds like the neighborhood cut up, and Ed could be a killer for hire. I've never been particularly fond of Edward, but it's the best of the alternatives, and I've stuck with it. His middle name was Pilkington. She'd have a field day with that. She was too cheeky by half, physically undeniably gorgeous, but too cute and not in a positive sense. Immature. Just as well. He didn't want to be attracted to Teresa's whatever. I'm your sister's apprentice, the woman explained. Xenia Britt. Interesting name. Celtic? She shrugged. With a name like Xenia, I would assume Greek or Russian, wouldn't you? Never knew my mother. She gave me up, left me on the steps of some church in Seattle with a card that read, This is Xenia, please take care of her. I chose Britt at random when no one adopted me. I was raised by foster parents. You know, a FOSP kid. He waited for more information. Foster Splash Pad, Allie and Joe's nonprofit. They help foster children who've aged out of the system get on their feet. He must have still appeared puzzled because she added, Allie and Liam were foster children. Come on, you knew that, right? He didn't know much, and that was a fact, as her condescending tone reminded him. Sure, he said. Someone, namely Teresa, needed to bring him up to speed. Where is Teresa, by the way? Xenia pouted. I'm boring you. Not at all. I'm highly entertained. That sounded sarcastic. He didn't enjoy being teased. Xenia was making him feel like the nerdy kid in junior high you could mock to his face. He'd never been that kid. I'll catch up with her later. As he turned to leave, his delighted sister walked into the room. Eddie! She cried and gave him a giant hug. He grimaced, kept his hands in the air. Now Xenia would never call him anything else. Not that he planned to seek out her company in the future. Hey, Teresa, he said, not using his nickname for her. Tear. He hoped she'd catch on and call him by his adult name, too. Come with me, she said, dragging him into the kitchen. I'll make us tea. Why don't we go out? The last thing he wanted was for Xenia to overhear their conversation. Okay, sure. There's a cafe a few doors away. They have these little butter cookies I adore. Xenia, I'm going out again. Once they were seated in the coffee shop, Edward asked, How long have you been mentoring Xenia? I don't know, a few months. I'm teaching her all the stuff Mom passed on to Jake and me about antiques, furniture styles, rugs, whatever. She's a quick study. We all help out with the FOSP kids in any way we can, sharing our talents such as they are. Liam teaches them shop skills like woodworking. Jean-Louis has discovered some gifted chefs and hired others, the best-looking men of the bunch mostly, as waiters. Others help out with cleanup and childcare at the compound for overly generous hourly rates and a leg up on their college careers. The majority live in FOSP housing in town, but Joe and Allie bought the house just down the road, so the ones who work at the compound don't need to own cars or travel late at night. Jake does some grammar tutoring. Kiara, some informal counseling, like that. Don't priests do counseling? You speak fluent French and Italian. You could get involved. He shook his head. I won't be here that long. Her chuckle was half-hearted. We all say that. How far along are you? He asked. May I? Of course. She held his hand to her baby bump. Just over 7 months. A girl, he thought. She'll be born too quickly. Someone needs to know that's going to happen and prepare. What? From her look of alarm, his dismay must have been transparent. Nothing, just wondering at the miracle of procreation. Are you happy? She is now, he thought. The marriage was shaky for a while. Of course, she said. I'm having a girl. You know me. I will adore dressing her. Her husband is afraid she'll spoil her, Edward thought. Damn. He shouldn't have touched her. He willed the messages to stop, and strangely enough, they did. Are you still at the Bishop? You should stay with us. Liam's house, she caught herself. Our house is only a few blocks away. Or stay at my office. There are bedrooms upstairs. Bedrooms, plural. Xenia is staying in one of them, but they have ensuite bathrooms. No way, he thought with an inward shudder. I'm fine for now, he told her. Come to dinner this evening. Liam is cooking spaghetti and meatballs. He always makes enough for an army. Thanks, that sounds good. I'm looking forward to getting to know your husband and figuring out why you refer to your shared home as his, he added silently. Her clear sky blue eyes were troubled. You're not going to disapprove of us, are you? Mom does. She thinks Liam is a handsomer, incredible Hulk, so what if he only has a degree from junior college? He's super smart and has more ingenuity than anyone I've ever met. He can hit the bullseye on a target with a hunting knife first try. He can fix or build anything. Impressive, Edward said evenly, endeavoring not to sound ironic. His sister of yesteryear would have turned up her nose at such hands-on skills. She obviously worshipped her husband. That might be part of the problem. I hear he's going to be an actor now, too? She nodded, less pleased with this development. He's been cast as Damon Morehouse in Jake and David's movie. Maddie's going to be the villainess. George Reed Masters will be Damien's best friend. His eyebrows shot up. He was surprised no one had filled him in about the movie casting at Thanksgiving dinner, although his mother had been glued to his side, and that movie was her least favorite subject. The guy she was humping in that movie, Insanity? Well, yes, Teresa admitted, biting her lip. That sounds awkward. Damon must buy condoms by the case in that book. Teresa avoided his eyes. Jake and David reworked the story when they wrote the script. It doesn't much resemble the source material. Besides, there's safety in numbers. As long as he's not pursuing one particular woman. Yes, of course, though fans of the book might be disappointed. Are you and Liam all right? Now she did look at him with narrowed eyes. Did someone tell you about Kilo? Kilo? At first, Edward couldn't place the name. You don't mean the boy you eloped with way back when? Memory shamed him. Egged on by their mother, he'd pulled Mr. Darcy and dragged them back from ruin, only no one had paid Kilo to make an honest woman of Teresa. The marriage had been annulled. Kilo roughed up and humiliated, and Teresa had been whisked off to Cape Cod and told to behave or be disinherited. Not long after, each of them inherited a separate fortune from their grandmother. Too late for Teresa and Kilo. The boy had gone on to join a prestigious modern dance company. Last Edward had heard, that was the end of his association with Teresa. Teresa's cheeks were on fire. She covered them with her hands. The very one. When I first arrived here, I discovered Kilo had opened a yoga studio on Lawrence Street, and we flirted a bit. Nothing more. He and Maddie, oh, for Pete's sake, it's hardly a secret. They were in a play together and dated for a while. Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Her agent saw a performance and got him cast in a pilot, the reboot of that old TV show, Hawaiian Eye. After he and Maddie broke up, he asked me to go to Maui with him for the filming. Edward was confused. Was this after you married Liam? Yes, that invitation was a total surprise. I wasn't tempted, but Liam didn't believe me. He keeps thinking I want to be with someone more creative or educated. It's so stupid. I only want to be with him. She heaved a heavy sigh. Now, Edward recalled more about Kilo, how they'd met when he was a dance scholarship student at Cornish College of the Arts. Teresa had been studying private piano with a teacher there. She, the model student at the all-girls Catholic high school. He, the exotic, sexy part Hawaiian son of a struggling single mother. Of course, those two beautiful kids from opposite sides of the tracks would fall in love. Teresa had dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, but their mother had put the kibosh on that lofty calling. Teresa had been raised to think creativity and education were everything. Maybe that was why Liam had decided to give acting a try. Although what Liam would be doing in Jake's movie might not fit Teresa's idea of acting. What a mess.